right? So it gives the other person more awareness and more context around why we're feeling a certain way or why we're responding or sometimes reacting a certain way. So that story in our head is a powerful thing that the more aware we can become of it, the more we can use it.
Ever feel like you suck at this job? Motherhood, I mean. Have too much anxiety and not enough patience? Too much yelling, not enough play? There's no manual, no village, no guarantees. The stakes are high. We want so badly to get it right. But this is survival mode. We're just trying to make it to bedtime. So if you're full of mom guilt, your temper scares you, you feel like you're screwing everything up, and you're afraid to admit any of those things out loud, this podcast is for you. This is Failing Motherhood. I'm Danielle Bettman, and each week we'll chat with a mom ready to be real, sharing her insecurities, her fears, her failures, and her wins. We do not have it all figured out. That's not the goal. The goal is to remind you, you are the mom your kids need. They need what you have, you are good enough, and you're not alone. I hope you pop in earbuds, somehow sneak away, and get ready to hear some hope from the trenches. You belong here, friend. We're so glad you're here. Hey, it's Danielle. Thank you so much for tuning in to Failing Motherhood, for sharing with a friend, for finding me on Instagram, for just being a part of this community, and for making the time to be the mom that you want to be, and to remind yourself that you are the parent that your kids need. I am so glad that you're tuning into this episode, because I feel like this is something that would have really, really helped me years ago as a mom. And so I'm creating the content I wish that I would have had 8 years ago, 7 years ago. Dr. Lynyetta Willis is a psychologist, a family empowerment coach, speaker, and award-winning author. She helps frustrated families break free from stable misery and unhelpful parenting and partnership patterns so they can create more harmony at home. Her Triggered to Transformed parent coaching program has helped parents all over the world to confidently deal with their triggers so they can pass on the best parts of themselves and enjoy parenting more. Sounds great, right? On this episode, she shares how she got started in this, how she ended up healing herself, and it wasn't getting a Ph.D., so you can cross that off your list. We dive into triggers and the difference between triggers and stress, which I feel like is kind of mind-blowing. And she had a really powerful analogy of kind of how it was different between her husband and her, and what things can be triggers and how you can tell. And then we end up talking more about emotions and sensations and how your sensations can help you identify your emotions and then identify the story you're telling yourself. So powerful if you can really soak this in. Such a key part of awareness as a parent. Then we talk more about stable misery and what stable misery is, how you realize if you're stuck in it, and what is a practical way that you can analyze where you're at and if it's worth moving forward, and then what to do about it. She connects us with a resource at the end that I feel like everybody could probably benefit from. And we laugh a lot on this episode. She is super fun to talk to, and we just got to kind of geek out on all things parenting. And I just can't believe this is my job. I guess I made it up, so that's a benefit of that. But it's just so cool to be able to share and connect with people like her that are really making a huge difference in the world and creating content and resources and platforms that are making a lot of change. And that's amazing. If I can do anything like that in my legacy, then it'll be time well spent. So speaking of that, the Wholeheartedly Calm is going to be starting again May 1st. And so you have until April 24th, Sunday, April 24th, to register for this next round so that I have enough time to get you mailed your workbook and get you all set up in the group and all of that good stuff. So if it's been weighing on your heart and you feel like you need something and you've been hanging out on the podcast long enough that you feel like maybe I'm your gal, then don't wait. Please don't wait. It is worth getting unstuck. It is worth the discomfort and the fear and the insecurity of taking action. But like we say in this episode, information is not transformation. You need to integrate and really soak in and apply these new tools so that they become a part of how you parent ongoing. And then investment lasts a lifetime and a generation. So go find all the information that you need at parentingwholeheartedly.com/group. And be sure to reach out over a DM on Instagram or email if you have any questions. And I cannot wait to see you say yes and invest in your family and make that commitment to change, because you absolutely won't regret it. And you will be the person saying, I wish I would have done this sooner. So let's dive into this episode with Dr. Willis. Welcome to Failing Motherhood. My name is Danielle Bettman, and on today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Lynyetta Willis. Hi, how are you?
Doing well. So excited to be here.
Good. Okay, so I came across you like a while ago. I don't even know if it was what it was exactly. It was a parenting summit where you were like a speaker, and I came across something on triggers, and so I had saved you in my pocket as a good resource. And now I'm just excited that we've gotten the chance to connect. So before we dive into like all the questions of your backstory and your work, go ahead and introduce yourself to my listeners. So who are you and who's in your family?
Oh, yeah. So I am Dr. Lynyetta Willis. Hello. Psychologist turned family empowerment coach. And I help frustrated families break free from what I like to call stable misery in their parenting as well as in their partnerships, so they can live with more joy. And who is in my family? Well, in my house, because family, that could take a while. But in my house is myself, my husband, Patrick, and my two kiddos. They are 9 and 13, boy, girl. Well, okay, 13 is a boy. A 9-year-old's a little girl. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So have you ever felt like you were failing motherhood?
No, I got this nailed down, like perfect. I am amazing. I'm sorry. Was that supposed to be a prerequisite? No.
You would definitely be an exception to the rule if that was true.
Such an exception. Oh my gosh. No. Yes. So one story that came up when I hear that question is, this was a few years ago when my son, I was starting my business and trying to get everything together, and I was focused. I don't know if you've ever started a new project or started a business or something like that, but like I was so focused, and I was doing all these webinars and these trainings on finding niches and all this stuff. And I was so into it. And one day my son walked into my office and he was like, "Hey, mommy." And he asked me a question and I answered it. And then he left. And then he did it a second time. And the third time, I must have given him like an annoyed look because he kept interrupting me. And he walks out and then he stops and he turns and he says, "Mommy, I know how important work is to you. So I promise I won't bother you again." And I was like, seriously? Oh, man. Like, it was one of those things where it was just like, what is happening right now? Did I really just prioritize this? At the time, it was a phantom business. It wasn't even like I had like droves of clients waiting for me. Like, I mean, I was basically just serving myself at that point. And here I am, like, being annoyed at my kid because I was on the road to the biggest breakthrough, not. And so in that moment, I kind of got up and I was like, "Babe, you are not bothering me. Like, seriously. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." But it hit me in a couple of things in that moment. Number one, it really made me say like, crap, what are my priorities? You know? And then the other thing that it did, it was one of those, like, what am I teaching him? You know, I'm really big about living and leaving the legacies that we want our children, you know, that will make us proud. It's a smile, you know, in the end of our days, like, did okay with that one, you know? And in that moment, it was like, what am I teaching my child about priorities and family and, you know, the difference between, you know, giving our families the best of us, not the rest of us, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And so it was really one of those moments there where I just felt like, crap. And the realization that likely wasn't the first time I had done that. It was just the first time he called me out on it.
Oof,
too,
ouch.
Right? So yeah, definitely Mom of the Year moment on that one. Thanks for bringing that up, Danielle. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. I just love to like poke at gaping wounds.
Thank you. Wow.
But I've definitely done the same thing. I've been guilty, and probably not even realizing it, you know, in the moment either, of having that consciousness, because we get into the flow of our own stuff and our own world, especially if it feels like this is the road to all the things I want for my family. Is this business. And if I can just get this figured out, then all of our problems are solved. And like, it really does feel like that sense of urgency. And I resonate with that 100% with my business too. So I know listeners will at least feel better knowing that someone with all of these accolades and all of the things has been in a similar place of mom guilt.
Yes. I think it was on some song, it was like more money, more problems, right? Like sometimes it's like the more responsibilities we have, it's like for me, I know I say like, when I get this project done, when I finish creating this, when I do that, then I'll have more autopilot situation. I'll be able to give more time, you know, but realizing it's really important that we create white space for ourselves as entrepreneurs, as people in general, right? Like being able to have that space for ourselves and being able to have that space for our families and being able to tell our children, this is when I'm working and this is when I'm free, right? And like, this is when the day is over, and really holding ourselves accountable to stick to that, right?
Oof,
and
hard.
Not to betray, not the kids, ourselves, right? Because I know I just wrote a post about self-compassion and how I didn't have it for myself, and I ended up getting COVID and my jaw locked shut, and like all this stuff started happening to me, you know, and realizing like, oh yeah, white space, self-compassion, all those things that I've been teaching about and learning about for over 2 decades. Like maybe I should apply that to myself. That might be a good idea right now, you know? So realizing like, we need to be able to segment our lives in helpful ways so that we don't fall into those slippery slope traps where our businesses become our mistresses, or, you know, we end up pushing back in ways that ultimately don't feel good to us, don't serve our careers, don't serve our families, and all of that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And so hard too with the pandemic, with working from home and having so much less boundaries and structure to that work-life balance, or whatever that elusive thing is.
Right. Whatever that is. You figure that out, let me know. But it's true. Like when I was in private practice, my office was like in another building across town. Now it's like through that door, right? Like, so right off my living room, you know, which does make, and then we have this electronic leash, AKA cell phone, that dings and pings and, you know, and just yanks us every 2 seconds, right? So that do not disturb mode is powerful. Use that, people. Use the do not disturb mode on your phone. It's your friend.
I need to do that. Absolutely need to do that. Yes. But yeah, there might be something that I need to. No, there's nothing that important.
Nothing. No. Even if your brain says there is, and it's like, we got to do it. It's an emergency. No, really, it's not. Like, it's really not. The world keeps spinning.
So true. Yes. I feel like we could probably talk about that alone. We really
could. A whole different episode.
The whole world. Yes. Yes. But I want to hear more about you. So you have a whole, you know, work life behind you.
Yes.
But how did you get started in this? Like, what was the beginning of your journey so that we can connote like the whole backstory?
Yeah. So the whole backstory. All right. I'm trying to think in my head, how far back do I really want to go? All right. So For me, I've always been, and I know a lot of people in the wellness field probably relate to this. I was always the one that people came to ask questions. Like even growing up in my household, I was often somewhat parentified as a child. Like people would come to me and be like, "Your aunt or your," and I'm like, "I'm 5. What are we doing right now? How am I supposed to help with this?" So it was always that sense of like, ask her. She's got an answer, And so after a while, I realized like, oh, I'm kind of good with this. And like many people, I experienced some traumas in my life and realized that at the time, I didn't call them traumas. I just knew there were things from my past that were impacting how I was showing up in present moments. So I did the responsible thing and I said, okay, I'm going to heal from this by going to get a Ph.D. and learning how to heal other people. And then I will vicariously learn the healing process and be healed. Spoiler alert, doesn't work that way, by the way. Just saying, I'm going to save you thousands and thousands of dollars. Don't do that.
Okay.
But I did. I went and I learned and I got all this information. And then I got married and realized that the stuff was still there. Regardless of how much intellectual information I had crammed into my head, I was still showing up and I was still very triggered by things that my husband did and reacting, and realizing like a lot of this is still past stuff that's creeping into my relationship and realizing like, not only is it not fair to my marriage, but it's not fair to me, So I ended up, for real, getting into a healing relationship with a therapist and just started going on the journey. And it really helped and deepened the healing work that I was able to do with my clients too. And at the time in private practice, I was seeing couples and individuals and teens and tweens and all these different people. And I started to realize that not only is this healing journey important, but there's also some themes that I started to notice popping up in terms of what everybody tends to get caught up in. And it's funny, what tends up to block us and catch us and trip us up are the same things that can help us to break free and move on from difficult experiences, which is often the case, a paradox of life. Yeah. So that's how I kind of got where I was. It was really one of those situations where realizing, like people talk about getting into a moment where being stuck where you are is more painful than the fear of moving on. And that's what I hit, like just being stuck and then realizing when I was pregnant, like, oh crap, now I'm going to influence little people that are going to be depending on me. Like, I've got to do something, I don't want to pass all this stuff on to my kids. And, so then I really started that really was a huge impetus as well that started me on my healing journey. And I just love working with people and helping people. So that was, something that I was realizing, like, I just love helping people to really embrace and go forth on their own journeys.
Yeah, love that. It's so evident through your work. If you just like look at 3 of your Instagram posts, it's like, you get that vibe already.
Oh, yay.
But what did that healing journey start to look like either pre or post pregnancy? How did that become real for you?
Yeah. Pre-pregnancy, that's a really great question. So pre-pregnancy, I always say, like, as we get older, we learn in some ways how not to trip people up, right? Like most of us have these ideas around social nuances and appropriate things to say and do. And we realize like, oh, I might be pushing a button. Maybe I should back up a little bit, or you don't really want to go there, or you're stressed and overwhelmed. As I said, as we grow, we get into those. So the thing with kids, they don't have that realization, right? So what ends up happening is they just tap dance all over stuff. They just trip. They don't know, And so pre-kids, I don't think I felt as much pressure. But post-kids, realizing like, these kids are triggering the crap out of me, realizing, like, and you don't even know, right? And it's like, okay, I can either control and change them, right, to stop triggering mama, or I could like really use what's coming up in me to realize what I need to do to heal, or what within me needs to be honored. I always say what within you needs to be healed or honored, right? So they really, in some ways, honestly became my teachers, because we can look at our kids and how they set us off and either stress us out or trigger us, which are two different things, by the way. We can look at that and we can say, that's so frustrating. You need to stop, right? Or we can say, I just approached a laser beam situation with an atom bomb. Maybe I need to look deeper into that and find out how to defuse some of these atom bombs, as opposed to expecting my child to stop detonating them. You know, and that's a big reason why I created Trigger to Transform, the group parenting program, because I realized there were a lot of parents who wanted to learn how to do that. Like, how do I focus on like dismantling this bomb as opposed to trying to get my kid to stop setting it off? You know, and just being kids. The other thing that does is it gives us a situation where we can gain clarity on, okay, where does a boundary or a limit need to be placed, as opposed to like, you're just annoying me, stop, right? Like if I'm just triggered all the time, then there needs to be a boundary 100% of the time. But if on Monday it's cute and then on Wednesday it lights me up and makes me mad, like maybe there's something there that I really need to get in touch with, you know? So getting clear is starting to get a handle on those triggers actually is a very lucrative and fruitful pathway into becoming the parent that we really want to be, because those things aren't, you know, in the way anymore.
So convicting. Yes. And what's the difference in your mind between triggers and stress?
Yeah. So in my trauma training, we always learned that stress, it happens when our demands, our perception of the demands being placed on us outweighs the coping resources that we have available to us to deal with those demands. All right. So, and it's all perception, right? Like, so I could perceive one thing as a demand and it's overwhelming, and you be like, this is the greatest thing ever, right? So that's what a stress is. And it happens in the present moment. So like I come home, the house is a mess. I have to finish up this report. Dinner's not ready. My kid's pulling on me. My kids are fighting. They're like, all of these things are leading up. So the demands are going up, 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 up. And the resources that I already came in the house with probably thin resources at that point. And they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, right? So I'm stressed in that moment. And that could lead me to overreact in ways that I don't want, because now I'm just going to rely on primitive things to try to deal with the situation, yelling or whatever.
Yep.
A trigger is the same thing, but it's from the past. So there was a moment in our life when the demands of a situation exceedingly outweighed the resources that we had to deal with it, whether it be, you know, we were in an abusive or neglectful home, or we had a traumatic loss or something like that, right? So when it's a trigger, what ends up happening is something that, let's say, our child or our partner does in the present moment, it triggers a past memory, right? And then we react in the present moment as if it's that past situation. And we often don't realize it. So a stressor is something that is present, but a trigger is coming from our past. Now, the thing is, you can have both. I can walk in the house, be overwhelmed and super stressed about everything that's going on, and then my child say or do something that triggers me. Well, that's a serious atom bomb moment, because now I don't even have the resources to keep that triggering experience at bay, and I'm overwhelmed. And the benefit of knowing this, because what ends up happening is the way it looks to the outside world, whether I'm stressed or triggered, it's going to probably look the same way. Like I could overreact, all of this stuff. But the key and the importance of us knowing the difference is we can figure out how we address it. So if it's a trigger, then I have something in me that needs to be healed, right? And so I need to figure out what that is. And that's the prime way that I can diffuse that trigger and keep it from continuing to impact my parenting, continuing to impact my partnership. If it's a stressor, then I need to honor that and figure out in those moments, how can I decrease the demands or increase my coping resources to deal with this stressor that keeps coming up, right?
Right.
And so differentiating the two really gives us the power and control to be able to say, okay, where do I need to dive deeper? Like a really good example just happened the other night. My daughter is a huge trigger for my husband, huge trigger. And he's very well aware of it. It comes from past stuff from his childhood and things that went on in his home when he was younger. And so when my daughter blows up, she gets fiery. She triggers him, but stresses me. Right? Meaning for him, it brings up all this past stuff. So for him, there's this realization, I need to go back and I need to heal some of this past stuff, because whether I'm stressed or not, this trigger is still going to be present and will still impact how I engage her, because I'm not engaging her from the present. I'm engaging her from my past stuff or my fear of the past repeating itself in my daughter. Right? Which is a whole different response versus me, where I'm like, it's 9:00 at night. I've been working all day and my resources are depleted and I just need you to stop. Right.
Yes.
And so in that case, now there are different things that I can do, right? Like I can call for backup with my husband, or I can talk to her about how can we make sleepy time easier. But for my husband, it doesn't matter when she blows up. It's going to still bring up that same trigger. For me, if she blows up, in the morning when I've had a full night's sleep and all that, I'm going to respond differently because I have more resources on board.
Yeah.
So is that clear?
No, I think that really is a great example to depict that analogy. And I think it's very descriptive to be able to resonate with a new awareness to being able to look back at yesterday or this past week and any situations that did go awry and be able to look at them with a little bit of a new lens to say what's really going on here. Because there is very often times that your child does the exact same thing at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday and 6 o'clock on a Thursday, and you react completely differently.
Exactly. And there's a good chance that that's probably a stressor, right? Like, it's just like, I'm just stressed and overwhelmed and over it, right? But if it's like, it doesn't matter if it's 6 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 5 o'clock, it doesn't matter. It still brings up the same sensations. You still tell yourself the same stories. And that's the other thing about triggers. Our responses to them are pretty consistent. It's like what it brings up in our body, which is something else that I think we really need to focus on that we often don't. Like, I was raised in an environment where feelings were like horrible. Like I shouldn't say horrible. Difficult feelings, right? Were not helpful, right? And it was like, stop crying before I give you something to cry about, or there's nothing wrong. Stop it, right? And so I grew up with this belief that feelings were evil and that they should be just pushed in a basement. But what I ended up realizing through my own work and working with families is that they're really signposts, right? They're really signposts that just give us information on where we feel connected, where we feel disconnected, what within our life feels safe and what feels unsafe, what tends to send us in fight, flight, freeze, and what tends to send us into flow, right? It's so when we really look at them that way, now they're no longer these horrible, evil things lurking in the night to come out and like pounce on us, right? But there are these things that we can look at and be like, whoa, I'm feeling really triggered right now, or I'm feeling really anxious, or I'm feeling afraid, or I'm really frustrated. Like in our house, we're really big at using words. Like I just told my daughter last night, she gets the second wind right before bed. It's really frustrating. And my husband doesn't help sometimes because sometimes he'll start chasing her and I'm like, seriously?
Why do they do that?
I don't know why they do that. And it was like, oh, sorry. Really?
You know what time it is, right?
Exactly. So she's like second wind and she's like, I'm going to go read. I'm going to do this. And I said, honey, mommy is tired and therefore I'm getting frustrated. Right. And I just said that and I spoke for those feelings. Now, that doesn't mean it's her responsibility. It wasn't anything that I needed her. Well, there was some things that I would like for her to do, like stop bouncing off the walls. Right. But it was really for me. Me naming that, like, I'm getting frustrated. And what would be really helpful is if we could go in your room and do lay time right now, right? And so stating, like, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm needing, right? And again, it's not her responsibility. It's not like you are making me frustrated, right? It's like my coping resources are kind of low, almost non-existent right now. So, or at least my energy is. I have very good coping resources, and my energy and my ability to access them in this moment is getting depleted, right? So I'm just going to name that, right? And then what ends up happening is my kids start doing it, my daughter will be like, I'm frustrated right now. And, great. Name that. Own that. They're not bad. They're just giving you insight into where you are. And then the next step is what you need.
Hey, sorry. I'm just going to interrupt with a quick story about a family that just graduated coaching. And I'm going to read their words and then we'll get right back to this episode. So this family has a 3, almost 4-year-old at this time. Mom said, our son had been really struggling with aggression and anger, and we couldn't seem to find ways to get through to him on our own or even with the help of a counselor and a therapist that he was seeing for months. It just seemed to be getting worse and worse, and we needed to try something else. We were skeptical that who would really be able to help at this point. And we heard your approach and realized that it was just meeting with us and not him, and we realized that that was a bit different, but maybe it would be a good different. But we also were a little concerned, like, why can't we just figure this out ourselves? By admitting and seeking help from someone like a family coach, is that a sign that we're failures or something? But in reading about your program and your approach, we realized that, we have a very strong-willed kid, and we can't deal with him in the same way. Traditional discipline may work for some kids, but it doesn't work for our kid, but we don't know how to do anything else. So we knew we had to do something, and as it turned out, what we really needed to do was look in the mirror more than anything else. We had to adjust what we were expecting out of him and ourselves, and this process really helped us do that. It helped us realign a lot of our priorities and the way that we've handled things, not just with parenting, but with each other and as a family. One of the biggest things we came to understand was the way that he was acting was a reflection of his way of communicating that he needed something and he didn't feel like his needs were being met. And we didn't understand that before. And diving into, what are those needs that aren't being met? And it wasn't basic needs. It was obviously he was being fed and had a nice place to live and all of those things. But was he feeling like he was getting enough love and attention from us? And as soon as we started implementing some of these changes, he's become a different kid. And not only that, but the other thing was he needs to be heard. He needs to feel like we are listening to him and we understand what he thinks is important and how he feels is important. And that has gone so far. Just as being acknowledging how he feels and understanding and being parents that are like, we don't understand why he's acting that way. He should just know how to do this, or he knows how to do this. Why is he being so difficult? Those shifts have been huge. And the other thing was having tools like the comparison charts for encouragement and praise, or the step-by-step approach for when he's hitting and we can be consistent, how important that was for us, our first strong-willed kid. That has been so huge. And also just having the time set aside to have these conversations we just wouldn't have done otherwise. We've mentioned this program to several friends, and they're like, what's so great about this parenting coach you're going to? And the amazing thing has been that it has been 100% focused on us and our behavior and what we can do to help our son be a happier, more successful little kid. And it's different. It's a different approach that I think most therapy and counseling takes when it comes to kids, and it has been exactly what we needed. The other types of therapies we tried, it was hard because when they're at that toddler age, we don't want them to feel like it's their problem or something's wrong with them, especially when that's not necessarily what it is. It was just we needed to find different ways to approach the struggles that every toddler has, and this approach just worked so much better for us. So if you want to hear more about this one-on-one coaching approach, go ahead and send me a message on Instagram, DM me the word sanity, and I will share more info with you and we can chat more about whether it's a good fit for your family. All right, back to the episode. And I feel like that's still a new concept. Like emotions are still a new concept all of us grown-ups are learning. But the thought that emotions are felt in the body is a whole nother level. So what can you give as like beginners tips for like awareness of being able to kind of link those and use them as, helpful information?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I often, and interestingly enough, the offer that I have at the end, will walk everybody through different processes to help do this. But one of the things is learning to access your emotions and your sensations when you are not overwhelmed or when you're not triggered or stressed. Okay. And the importance of that is if we only start to notice them when we're triggered or stressed and we're not used to doing it, our brain will do just the opposite. Right? Because our brain is trained that these sensations and these feelings are not good. They're not our friend. We need to push them away. Right. So the beginning is start noticing them when you're just sitting down. Like maybe set a timer on your clock and on your phone and just sit and think like, what am I feeling in my body right now? Where do I notice that? Right. And then the next step is starting to associate emotions with those sensations. Right. So I have a sensation in my stomach that it's kind of like light and airy and a little tickly. Right. And for me, if I associate a feeling with that, it's like in this, like I'm literally searching right now. It's like kind of light and tickly. And what it is, it's like this feeling of like excitement and anticipation because I'm here and I'm talking to you and this is fun. Right. So I associate that feeling with like fun and excitement and what are we going to talk about next? And, so really just starting to learn what are the sensations. And you can even do this like 2 days, just focusing on the sensation. I notice a sensation here. I notice a sensation there. And then the next day, add in what meaning do I make of that sensation in this moment? Right? Like I'm excited, I'm anxious, I'm exhausted, right? Like what meaning do I make of that? Yeah. And then, you can move on to, okay, what stories am I telling myself with regards to this, right?
Yes.
So like funny little feeling in my tummy and I'm associating that with a feeling of excitement and I'm telling myself the story that, hey, this is fun. We should do this more often, right? And so the same thing happens with our kids. Like last night when I was sitting with Autumn and she wouldn't go to bed and like, because my husband just ran her around the house. Thanks, honey. So it's one of those things where the feeling then was my shoulders got really tight. So the sensation was in my shoulders, right? It's not good or bad. It's just a sensation was in my shoulders, right? And the feeling that I associated with that was frustration, right? And the story that I told myself in that moment was, if this doesn't stop and we don't start getting in bed, I think I'm just going to lose my mind. Right? She's literally gonna fall out of my ears onto the floor. That is where my mind will go. Right? So and that story is then it's like a loop. It'll then go back and reinforce the sensations that I have and the feelings that, right? So now I'm afraid my mind's gonna leak out of my ears. So now I might feel like in addition to my shoulders being hurt, now my stomach might start to cramp. And now I'm angry. Right? And then I'm angry because I'm telling myself that Patrick doesn't care. He's not the one that does bedtime, so he doesn't give a flying flip. How excited and up the wall she is at this point. Oh, so frustrated, And so now it's like this whole story avalanche experience, right? But when you just start small. Just start with noticing. I would say this, start with whatever's easiest for you to access. If it's your body sensation, start there. If it's the emotions, start there. If it's the stories, start there, right? But they all connect to each other. So start with the thing that it's the easiest for you to access.
I love that.
And then go from there.
Yeah. I had a similar incident where I was really conscious of that cycle because I woke up in the middle of the night and I thought to myself, like, what's going on with my body? Why am I awake? And my stomach gurgled. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I was like starting to think about it and I realized I think I have a bit of a stomachache. Like maybe I'm starting to feel sick. And then I started telling myself the story of, it was the hamburger. It's food poisoning. I for sure have food poisoning. And then, of course, it got worse. And so then I was like up for the next half hour, wondering how the kids are going to start waking up with food poisoning. The guests we had over for dinner are going to have food poisoning. How am I going to show my face to them? It was a whole thing. And then I started like reading and getting my mind off of it. And it started going away. Oddly enough, I did not have food poisoning.
Such a good example how we do that, right? Like
Yes.
we constantly do that. And I talk about the stories in our heads. You know, one of the things that I do when I'm working, especially with couples, I will literally start a process where I get them in the habit of starting every sentence with the story in my head is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because when you recognize what the story, because what we often do is we recognize the story in our heads, maybe, but we don't say it, but we speak from it. Right?
Yes.
So the story in our head is, oh my God, I have food poisoning. Right? So instead of saying the story in my head is, I have food poisoning, which often leads the other person to go, oh, well, let me give you 15 reasons why that may not be the case. Right? Or in the case of couples, it's like the story in my head, like with Patrick, is you don't really care how riled up you get her because I'm the one that does bedtime and it doesn't matter to you. Right? If I were to say that to him, then he could be like, I hear you. And I'm sorry, I really didn't think about it that deeply. The story in my head was, there's my kid. We're actually feeling connected in this moment. I'm excited and I want to run and play with her. I honestly wasn't thinking, but now that I hear that it creates that story, I can do something different. Right? So it gives the other person more awareness and more context around why we're feeling a certain way or why we're responding or sometimes reacting a certain way. So that story in our head is a powerful thing. Powerful thing that the more aware we can become of it, the more we can use it.
Yes. And hopefully find something better but believable.
Right.
To replace it with.
Yes. Believable is important.
Yes. Like I'm the best parent there ever was, and things like that.
Right. And all parts within you were like, whatever.
Don't believe it. Yep.
We don't believe that. Call it shenanigans.
Yep. Your body will definitely let you know. When
exactly.
It doesn't resonate. Yeah, and I'm actually working on a super related project to this concept, so I have to bring that up too, where a colleague and I, Sarah Olsher, have created a kids' mental health subscription box. And box number 4 is 4, 5, and 6 are all about emotions, and box 4 has a tool where on one side it has the emotion faces and names, and on the other side it has the body and a dry erase marker, and you help your child figure out their sensations. And then you either start with the sensations and then decide the emotion, or start with the emotion and then depict the sensations. It goes along with a book talking about emotions. But if that is something that you are still trying to learn as a grown-up, that can be a tool that you can both use together to figure that out a little practically. So I'm actually recording the parent training for that like later today. So that is really accurate.
Right up there. I was just about to say, like, can you have an adult's version of that?
Right?
I can definitely see the benefit. And like for the kid, they'll be like, in my tummy. And the adults will just be doing the whole body. Like everywhere. Like, all the things.
Totally. Yes. Might be kind of therapeutic, so there's a lot of benefits to that. Yeah.
Just like scribbling all over the body.
Yep. I could totally see doing that.
Yes.
The kid's just like slowly walking away.
Yeah, I know. Think I'm gonna play in my room now. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. But that sounds fantastic. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we should connect offline. I'll hook you up with the info.
Please.
But the other thing I wanted to circle back to or dial into a little bit is this concept of stable misery. Because I came across that wording, you use it a lot, and right off the bat, I'm sure listeners are like, what? So what is that to you? And why do families tend to stay in this state?
Yeah. Stable misery. I love that phrase. Been using it for almost 20 years now. And it's that state we often find ourselves in, where the house isn't on fire, but we're not living in a crisis situation, but we're just genuinely feeling unfulfilled, unhelpful, and things just aren't going well, but we feel stuck there, right? We're not really sure how to break free or how to get out. So it's stable because we're there a lot, right? But it's miserable. And the reason why we tend to get stuck there is actually a brain thing, right? Our brain actually prefers familiar over uncertainty. So the idea that when we fall into these stable misery patterns, often which remind us of something from the past, like this is how if you really look at some of the stable misery patterns that we fall into, especially in our families, we can often see some connections like, oh, this is how my parents acted, or, oh, this is where, this reminds me of this relationship with this or that person, right? So realizing that our brain will always go to the familiar, even if the familiar leads us to feel miserable, because uncertainty and possibility of joy it's not always enough to pull us out and to do things differently. The other issue is our brains often, they just start to fall into habits. Like one thing I often say is if you are living in stable misery as a parent or in your partnership, it's not a sign that you're broken, your kid's broken, or your partner's broken, but it is a sign that you probably have habits that need to be. Right? So we fall into these habits, and it really is a process. Like the way I conceptualize stable misery, it's an unhelpful habit that we can fall into with our families. And it actually takes intention and a bit of experimentation to pull out. Experiment is another word that I love. It's one of my buzzwords, right? Always doing different experiments to help us to lift us out of there so that we can move closer to joy in a way that doesn't lead our nervous systems to feel unsafe or disconnected.
So if a family is listening to this and they resonate with that, where they're like, yep, that's us. What would you say to them to encourage them, to let them know that it's possible and that it is worth that experimentation?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it from the perspective of worth and value of experimenting and breaking free, it's just, is this a place you want to live for the rest of your marriage or the rest of the time your kids are at home? Probably not. If you're anything like me, you want to create a home where your kids actually want to come back for holiday break after they leave. They want to bring their kids, your grandkids, to visit, so creating an environment now that feels good to you will help with that, right? The other thing is, if you're in a partnership, realizing like, do I want to retire with this person in this way, right? Like realizing like, is it worth it to move forward, or is it not bad enough where you're like, I could live like this for the next 50, 60 years. I'm fine. So really just realizing, hey, I really want to, like, is it worth it to me to move forward? The other thing that I often ask is, ask yourself, I always tell people to do this little imaginative exercise where you close your eyes and you sort of envision how your house is functioning, how your relationship is functioning, how your connection with your kids are functioning. And then, and when you have that really held in your mind really well, to now replace everyone in that image with your children. So now your child is you, they're with their partner, they have their own children, and they are living the exact same life that you are living now. If that makes you cringe or go, oh God, then that also might be another point that it's worth it to move, because that will likely happen. Right? Yeah. Children learn what they live. So being able to say, like, I want to shift how we're showing up as a couple because it will impact how our children show up as a couple. That could also be something to look towards. So it really is an individual conversation and insight that everyone has to come to. Like, maybe it's not bad enough to move. And if that's the case, own that and good luck with that. If you realize like, oh, okay, I really hadn't thought of it that way, and I'm realizing, no, maybe it is bad enough that we need to move, then start with really small experiments, small things that you can do to start shifting the habits. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure that's convicting. And I'm sure you have heard more than plenty of times from families, I wish we would have done this sooner.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Especially families like in that are getting to triggered to transformed. This idea of, I hear two things. One, wish I would have done this sooner. And two, I wish this was around for kids, which sort of points into what you were saying, right? About your thing. Like, imagine if we were taught this in schools, like all of this emotional intelligence and all of this stuff. And it's not too late. Like our brains, there's this thing called neuroplasticity, meaning our brains can literally be rewired. They used to think it was like once the brain was formed, that was it. There's no change in it, but we know now that that's not true. We can absolutely, literally change the way our brain functions and therefore the way that we function in the world. So it's not too late. You can do it. Does it take energy? Yes. Does it take effort? Yes. Does it take more effort than getting a Ph.D. or sitting down and reading the 50 parenting books that I know all of you have on your nightstand? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. It actually takes action and experimentation and realization and all of these different things to actually move that needle so that you start to see changes in the way that you're showing up in your life.
Yes. I love that phrase, like, information is not transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, information is so prevalent. We have Google, so it gives us like a false sense of, I'm making progress, I'm making changes, but really it's just information.
It is. And again, it goes, I'm sorry, I'm a neuro nerd, so I always relate things back to the brain. It goes back to the brain, right? So all that information, all that parenting and partnership stuff you're taking in, all that is stored in your frontal lobe. When you are triggered or overwhelmed with stress, guess which part of your brain is the first part of your brain to shut down? The frontal lobe. So you literally don't have access to all that book knowledge. So it's not a personal failure when it's like, I just read what I was supposed to say and do in that situation. And then he came in or she came in and did that thing. And then I forgot it, went out the window, and I did what I did before. That's because you don't have it needs to, people say you got to get it in your bones. Right? Like it really needs to be something that's integrated into different parts of your brain and your body so that you can access it even when you're triggered. One of the things that I have in Triggered to Transformed is this model I created called the elemental living model. And I literally pair the 4 elements with different ways that we can respond in specifically our parenting, but it works in partnerships too. And it's based on this idea that when we're in those moments, we can't access new information as easily. So that book you just read, but what we can access are things that are sort of ingrained in the back of our mind. So if you live on planet Earth, you know how the elements work. Air is air, water is water, fire is fire, earth is earth, right? So you may not be able to access that one sentence that Dan Siegel or whatever said in the book, but you can access the idea that when my child is in fire, I should bring water. What does bringing water look like, right? Like you can access those very rudimentary ideas. So in elemental living, we literally pair, and it's individualized for everyone, because what bringing water looks like for you and what bringing water looks like for me can be very different. But it's using all of the elements in a way where you can literally create your own parenting manual so that you can access those habits and those shifts that you want to make in your relationship in a way that's helpful for you and accessible to you when you need them most.
Yeah, that's exactly what they need. Yes. So smart. It's like you know a thing or two.
I know. I'm such a visual person. I get images before I get words. Like that's just always been my thought. So I see things in my mind's eye and I'm like, what is that supposed to mean? I have to add words to it later.
That's so cool. Yeah. Well, I'm sure that there's a lot of people like that. So that's exactly why you can create the content that resonates with that type of person so readily available. That's so cool. So last, if I give you a pedestal, and what haven't we covered that you always really feel like needs to be heard or needs to be said when you have a group of listeners? What would you like to share with them that we haven't covered yet?
It goes back to that sense that you're not broken, right? You're not broken. And parenting, it really is a process. It's a process and a practice. It's not about being perfect. It's about realizing that the steps that you need to take to be the parent that you want to be you're not stuck in the patterns that you were raised with. Like, you can make those steps. You can make those changes. It just requires some experimentation, some realization and awareness, a lot of what we talked about today, around the bodies and the emotions and things like that. You can rewire your brain. So if you are stuck in stable misery as a parent, as a partner, whatever, it is possible for you to break free. You can transform the legacies that you were handed down. I always say you're not leashed to your legacies. You can transform them in a way that could actually be fun. I hear that a lot too. People are like, there is some fun to it. It doesn't all have to be drama, right? And so just realizing that you can make those shifts, you can make those changes. All you have to do is say yes and commit to it.
Yeah, that's so empowering.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so good. So how can listeners connect with you? Share a little bit more of like that next step and your platforms.
Yes, absolutely. So if you go to healingstablemissouri.com, you can download I created everything that I talked about today. I talked earlier about how there's I didn't say 5, but there are 5 areas where if we transform those areas, they can either create a barrier or a way forward. And so I outline those 5 areas, and every single day for 5 days, you'll get a gift that you can use, a resource that you can use to actually start to transform those areas and do a lot of the work that we've been talking about today for yourself as a parent or as a partner. You'll also get access to my parenting triggers quiz, What's Your Parenting Trigger Score, that will give you some really good insight into how you are showing up as a parent, what you look like, what you tend to do when you're triggered, that sort of thing. Because I realized we all have these habits that we tend to fall into, habit types that we tend to fall into. So you'll get access to that as well. So head on over, grab that resource, and start transforming. You can do it.
Yes. Okay, I'll have that linked in the show notes. Okay. That's so relatable to, this conversation. So I think that that's a really smart next step. And then the last question I ask every guest is, how are you the parent that your kids need?
That's such a good question. How am I the parent that my kids need? Wow. The interesting thing about that question, and I know you didn't ask it for a dissertation, so I'll make that short, is we tend to have like this negativity bias, right? That's what our brain does. Our brain goes towards the negative. So what you're basically asking is, how am I an awesome mom, right? And so it takes a while for our brain to like filter through and be like, how am I the mom that my kids need? I think ultimately it comes down to the idea that I do believe that we all have power, even though it may not always seem that way. I do believe that we all are what I like to call it's an acronym for whole, enough, loved, and learning, right? And whenever I'm fully present and in the flow, I try my best to instill that in my kids. You are whole, you are enough, you are loved, and you are always 100% learning, right? And realizing that, and that allows me to approach them with curiosity, right? And in so doing, allows me to shift some aspects of the legacy that I was handed, some which were very great and wonderful, and others that I think I want to prune that a little bit. I could probably leave that where it is, right? And so because I'm so mindful and because I'm so passionate about living and leaving legacies that make me proud, creating a type of home that my kids want to return to when they're older, I think they got a pretty good deal with me. I'm just saying.
Sounds like it, yes.
I'm going to remind them of that. I'm going to remind them of that when I pick them up today. You got a good deal. Everybody, that's your homework. Remind your kids, you got a good deal. Anybody listening to this podcast, your kids got a good deal.
Yes. Yes. That is exactly what I'm trying to say. Thank you. Yes. Oh, that's their only takeaway.
Exactly.
Please embrace it. Yes. Yes. Your kids are lucky to have you, and we are lucky to have you. Thank you so much for the time that you take to be able to share this with us, and for creating all these free resources and just being you. We really, really appreciate it, and it is changing the world.
Thank you. And ditto, right back at you.
Of course.
Can't wait for those boxes.
Was this conversation not super practical? If you can't apply something from this conversation today, I would be surprised. I feel like it was so good. I had so much fun recording it, and I'm so grateful to share it. Definitely connect with Dr. Willis on Instagram. Go check out that free resource, and let me know if you are enjoying the podcast. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Share it in your stories. Tell a friend. It really does make a difference when parents are able to become conscious and aware that these resources and tools are out there and change is possible for their family. You are not stuck in what you were given. You can make a change, and if you are making a change, your kids have a good deal. So, thank you for coming on this journey with me. I believe in you, and I'm cheering you on.